It was supposed to be a routine hearing, just another attempt to silence Karoline Leavitt. But when she walked into court wearing a simple gold cross, all hell broke loose. The judge slammed her with a fine. The media called it a symbol of extremism. What they didn't expect. Karoline wasn't just there to defend herself. She was there to dismantle the system, piece by piece. By the time she was done, even the judge was speechless. This is the story they didn't want you to see. The marble walls of the federal courthouse absorbed every word like a mausoleum. Outside, cameras clicked and protesters chanted, but inside it was deathly quiet. Judge Elias Harmon presided from the bench with the smugness of a man who'd never been challenged. Appointed during the Clinton years, praised by MSNBC as a defender of judicial decorum, Harmon had long made his disdain for public religious expression clear. And now, standing in front of him, calm, composed, and utterly defiant, was Karoline Leavitt. She wasn't here to testify. She wasn't even subpoenaed. She had come by choice, to observe a motion hearing involving faith-based legal protections. But the moment she walked through the courtroom doors, all eyes locked on one thing: the gleaming gold cross around her neck. "Ms. Leavitt," Harmon said, squinting over his glasses, "this court does not permit overt religious symbols within its chambers. Remove the necklace or be held in contempt." The room shifted. Reporters' pens froze. Even a few attorneys traded glances. No one spoke. Karoline tilted her head. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. Did you just threaten me for practicing my faith? You are not here as a religious figure. You are not exempt. Remove the necklace or pay the price." She looked down at the cross, then back up. Her voice didn't tremble. "Then I'll pay." Harmon blinked. "You'll pay?" She nodded. "I will not hide my faith because it offends your politics." His gavel slammed against the bench, echoing like a gunshot. $5,000. Immediate contempt of court. "Bailiff, make a note." Gasps rippled through the gallery. A legal observer in the front row whispered, "He just fined her for a cross." But Karoline didn't flinch. She reached into her bag, pulled out a checkbook, and calmly began writing. "Who do I make out to, Judge?" she asked. "The court? Or your re-election committee?" That drew murmurs. Harmon's face flushed crimson. "You are dangerously close to being removed from this courtroom, Ms. Leavitt." She tore the check from the pad, held it up for him to see, then tucked it neatly back into her folder. "I'm not afraid of your threats," she said. "But I hope you're ready to defend that fine, because I am." For the first time, Harmon hesitated. This wasn't just another protester. This wasn't a publicity stunt. Karoline Leavitt had come prepared. She walked to her seat in the gallery, cross still glinting defiantly, and sat with her back straight and hands folded, like someone waiting to play a very long, very dangerous game. And somewhere in the back row, an assistant U.S. attorney muttered under her breath, "He just made the biggest mistake of his career." Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy ignited like dry brush under a match. CNN's cheering blared. Karoline Leavitt fined for religious symbol in courtroom. MSNBC framed it more aggressively. Far-right firebrand defies court order in religious stunt. The View devoted an entire segment to Karoline's cross, labeling it weaponized faith. And within minutes, #ContemptForChrist trended on X. But while the networks scrambled to spin their narratives, Karoline sat alone in her hotel room, cross still around her neck, eyes fixed on a thick legal binder worn from use. This wasn't spontaneous. She had predicted Judge Harmon's reaction months ago, studied his rulings, reviewed video footage of his courtroom behavior, cross-referenced the transcripts of 27 cases involving religious plaintiffs, and saw the pattern clear as day. Harmon had once dismissed a Christian veteran for wearing a lapel pin, had forced a Muslim woman to remove her hijab, and yet, just last year, he praised an LGBTQ+ defendant for wearing a rainbow sash in court, calling it an expression of identity. Karoline hadn't worn the cross today to make a statement. She'd worn it to lay a trap, and Harmon had marched straight into it. Her legal pad overflowed with annotations. Turner v. Safley, Barnett, RFRA. Every note was color-coded, cross-indexed, rehearsed. For 6 months, she'd prepared, not as a politician or pundit, but as a lawyer in spirit, if not in title. And that preparation wasn't just for today. It was part of a longer, broader plan. The fight wasn't just with Judge Harmon. It was with an entire system. A system that mocked faith while promoting secular ideology. A system that permitted speech, but only speech it agreed with. A system that punished belief, not because it was disruptive, but because it wasn't fashionable. She had seen it coming. After all, her last public clash with Chuck Schumer had already sent tremors through the D.C. establishment. Then came the showdown with Hakeem Jeffries, where she exposed a backroom memo attempting to redefine domestic extremism to include pro-life organizations. And most recently, she went head-to-head with Jasmine Crockett in a House Oversight hearing, where a racially charged campaign memo had erupted into a national scandal. Those moments weren't isolated. They were dominoes. And today, another one had tipped. Her phone lit up. Another call from her comms director. She ignored it. Karoline wasn't interested in messaging right now. She was planning. She flipped a tab in the binder. Judicial misconduct and First Amendment violations. This wasn't going to end in that courtroom. She'd seen the system's weakness, and now she was going to tear it apart using its own rules. And while pundits ridiculed her from TV studios and politicians chuckled behind closed doors, none of them understood what was really happening. Because this wasn't about the cross. This was about the Constitution. And Karoline Leavitt had just declared war on every judge, bureaucrat, and politician who thought faith was a liability instead of a right. Tomorrow, she would return to court, not as the accused, but as the architect. The next morning, the courthouse brimmed with unease. Reporters whispered, cameras rolled nonstop, and an unusual number of law clerks filled the gallery, notebooks ready. Everyone sensed it. Something bigger was unfolding. Karoline Leavitt stepped through the courtroom doors not with hesitation, but with precision. In her hand, the same legal binder she'd reviewed for months. Around her neck, the same gold cross that sparked a national controversy just 24 hours earlier. Judge Harmon didn't look up immediately. He shuffled papers, buying time. But when he finally raised his eyes, Karoline was already on her feet. "I'd like to address the court directly," she said. He squinted. "Your attorney can speak for you." "I have no attorney, Your Honor," Karoline replied. "I intend to represent myself." A collective inhale from the audience. Even the clerk's pen paused mid-note. Harmon leaned back in his chair. "You're not a licensed attorney. This is not a political rally. You'll be chewed up in here." Karoline opened her binder. "That's what you're counting on. That I'm just another protester who wandered in above her pay grade." He gave a dry chuckle. "And you aren't." "No," she said, flipping to a tab marked Case Law. "I'm someone who studied every ruling you've issued involving religion in this courtroom. I've documented your double standards. I've compiled precedent. And I've come prepared to make a constitutional argument." Harmon frowned. "This court doesn't entertain grandstanding." "Good," Karoline replied, "because I'm here to argue the law." She stepped forward, not dramatically, but deliberately, and placed 3 neatly tabbed cases on the defense table. Turner versus Safley. West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. Employment Division versus Smith. "You ruled my cross was in contempt," she said. "Let me show you what real contempt looks like, contempt for the Constitution." She began by quoting Barnett. "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or matters of opinion." She turned to the gallery. "Judge Harmon has done exactly that, redefining decorum as code for censorship." He raised a hand. "You're not permitted to." She continued. "In Turner versus Safley, the court held that even in the most restricted government settings, like prisons, religious rights must be balanced against legitimate interests." "What's your compelling interest, Judge?" "That someone might see my cross and be offended." He clenched his jaw, the bench suddenly feeling smaller beneath him. And finally, in Employment Division versus Smith, the Supreme Court emphasized that even facially neutral laws cannot burden religious exercise without a narrowly tailored justification. "You don't have one. You never did." Silence. Even the stenographer stopped typing. "You think quoting a few cases will save you?" Harmon asked, voice low, defensive. "No," Karoline replied, folding her binder shut. "But they'll expose you." She sat down, perfectly calm, while the room erupted in hushed astonishment. And Harmon, for the first time in his long, unchallenged career, he looked afraid. The courtroom felt different now. The walls hadn't moved. but power had. Subtle, invisible, undeniable. Judge Harmon still sat high above everyone, but it was Karoline Leavitt who now held the room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her arguments had sliced through the legal silence like a surgeon's scalpel, precise, clinical, devastating. And now, she was ready for the second incision. "Your Honor," she began, rising once more, "before we proceed, I respectfully request the court take judicial notice of a pattern." "A pattern?" Harmon echoed, his tone brittle. "Yes," she said, calmly flipping to a new tab in her binder labeled Selective Enforcement. "A pattern of how this courtroom applies its rules, specifically when it comes to public displays of belief, identity, and personal conviction." She pulled out a set of printed photographs and documentation, case files, docket summaries, even screenshots from C-SPAN and news broadcasts. She handed them to the bailiff, who reluctantly passed them to the bench. "Let's begin with case 19-614, Karoline said. The defendant wore a "Love is Love" button, a political and social statement tied to a secular worldview. No objection, no fine, no rebuke. She flipped another page. Case 22-981. A witness entered wearing a Black Lives Matter mask. Not only was he permitted to testify, but the court commended his civic courage. She took a beat. And yet in case 24-117, my case, a passive religious symbol worn silently and peacefully prompted an immediate contempt citation. Murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Even a reporter from NPR furrowed her brow. Harmon tried to wave it off. "That's not comparable." "Respectfully, Your Honor," Karoline interrupted, "that's not your call. The First Amendment doesn't pick favorites. This court is either neutral or it's in violation." He narrowed his eyes. "This is dangerously close to accusing the bench of bias." She locked eyes with him. "It's not close. It's exact." There was a pause, just long enough to feel eternal. Karoline pressed forward, flipping to a spreadsheet titled 14 Incidents of Selective Enforcement. "I've tracked 14 distinct instances, under your tenure, where expressions aligned with secular progressive ideology were permitted, praised, even defended. But faith-based expressions." She tapped the page. "Sanctioned, silenced, punished." Someone in the gallery whispered, "She's got receipts." Judge Harmon looked down at the evidence. His hand hovered over the gavel, but it didn't strike. Not this time. Karoline took a final step toward the podium. "You've turned neutrality into weaponized preference. You've dressed censorship in a black robe and called it protocol." The tension snapped. A court clerk audibly gasped. One of Harmon's clerks avoided eye contact entirely. "You're walking a thin line, Ms. Leavitt," Harmon said, clearly rattled now. She smiled. "The line between justice and persecution. I'm not just walking it, Judge. I'm dancing on it." The courtroom didn't erupt, but it didn't have to. The silence that followed was louder than any cheer. And for the first time, the power in that room didn't rest on a bench. It stood behind a cross. The courtroom had slipped into something worse than chaos. Total stillness. Not a cough. Not a scribble of a pen. It was the kind of silence that swallows a room whole. The kind that doesn't just happen. It's earned. And Karoline Leavitt had earned it. Judge Harmon shifted in his chair, no longer perched with confidence, but hunched forward, elbows resting awkwardly, as if searching for something, anything, to anchor himself. But the weight of the evidence Karoline had laid before him was suffocating. The binder, the precedents, the spreadsheet, the names, the photos, the cases. All real, all documented, all damning. It wasn't just her arguments that broke him. It was the truth. Karoline stood again, this time without ceremony. "I'd like to enter one final piece of evidence into the record," she said, her voice still steady, still calm, deadly calm. Judge Harmon didn't speak. He just nodded, a flick of his fingers betraying his loss of control. Karoline placed a copy of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act on the defense table. Then, slowly, deliberately, she began to read. "No government shall substantially burden a person's exercise of religion, even if the burden results from a rule of general applicability." She paused. "This court claims neutrality," she said, eyes raised to the bench. "But you fine me, threaten me, and try to humiliate me for exercising a right protected not just by the Constitution, but by federal law. The tension in the gallery was electric. I was fined $5,000 for wearing a cross. In America, in 2025, she turned, addressing the audience now, not the bench. And yet the same court has allowed political buttons, ideological masks, and identity symbols without question, because they align with the ruling class's narrative. That's not justice. That's selective tyranny dressed in legalese. One of the younger clerks dropped his pen. A reporter's mouth fell open. Judge Harmon finally spoke, but his voice cracked on the first word. Ms. Leavitt, this court operates under a defined code of conduct. And that code, Karoline interrupted, has been applied with all the consistency of a roulette wheel. The difference between being punished and praised in this courtroom isn't what you wear, it's what you believe. Her final words hung in the air like smoke from a cannon. You've weaponized the bench, Your Honor, she said softly. And now you've been disarmed. The room held its breath. A bailiff fidgeted with his cuffs. A woman in the gallery wiped away a tear. Even the camera operator filming for public record zoomed in, almost instinctively, on Karoline's cross, catching the light like a torch in a dark chamber. Outside, the crowd, watching on live stream, exploded. #disarmed trended within minutes. Memes poured in. Screenshots of Harmon's stunned expression circulated faster than any cable network could react. Back inside, the judge said nothing, because for the first time in his courtroom, he had nothing to say. And Karoline, she simply sat back down, folded her hands, and waited. Because she knew this wasn't over. This was just the part where the system began to crack. The court recessed at exactly 11:42 a.m. Judge Harmon didn't bang the gavel. He didn't even make eye contact with Karoline. He simply mumbled, 10-minute recess, and disappeared behind the heavy oak door like a man ducking for cover in a war zone. But 10 minutes became 20, then 45. Karoline sat motionless, her cross still visible, her binder still open on the table beside her. She didn't pace. She didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. She knew what was happening behind those closed doors. Harmon wasn't just consulting clerks. He was unraveling. Word had spread fast, too fast for the court to contain. The live stream had gone viral. Legal analysts on X were already calling her opening statement a constitutional masterclass. A former federal judge tweeted, Leavitt just made a mockery of judicial bias in real time. Watch closely. The appeals are already writing themselves. In a side chamber behind the courtroom, Harmon likely read those same headlines. He'd spent years cultivating an image of calm, academic detachment. He was the judge who didn't break, didn't bend, didn't show his politics. And now, in a single morning, that mask had shattered. At 12:27 p.m., the door opened again. The courtroom rose. But Judge Harmon didn't stand taller when he returned. He looked smaller somehow. The shoulders slumped. The expression hollow, as if he'd aged years in less than an hour. He cleared his throat, adjusted his robe, and spoke, monotone, robotic, defeated. This court has reviewed the arguments presented. In light of additional legal precedent, and in the interest of procedural fairness, the contempt citation issued against Ms. Leavitt is hereby vacated. There was a pause. He stared at the bench. No eye contact. No energy. Just bureaucracy in retreat. Karoline raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Harmon continued. Furthermore, this court will issue a temporary suspension of its existing dress code policy, pending a full review, effective immediately. The gallery buzzed. A ripple of murmurs passed through the press row. But Karoline didn't move. She waited. And the formal apology, she asked, her voice sharp but calm. Harmon blinked. This court does not issue apologies, he said stiffly. She smiled, softly, almost pityingly. Then I suppose I'll see you at the appellate level. The room stirred again. Even Harmon's own clerks looked stunned. Karoline closed her binder and stood, not in triumph, but with purpose. Because this wasn't about a courtroom anymore. It was about the country. And this ruling, half-hearted as it was, would be the first domino to fall. Across the nation, faith-based legal groups were already mobilizing. Civil rights attorneys were dissecting the footage. Law schools were debating the implications. Outside the courthouse, a crowd of supporters had gathered, spontaneously, organically. They weren't chanting slogans. They were holding crosses. Silent, peaceful, resolute. Karoline stepped out into the light. The cross around her neck gleamed in the sun. It was no longer just jewelry. It was evidence. By sundown, the clip of Karoline Leavitt standing firm in that courtroom, cross around her neck, voice unwavering, had racked up over 30 million views. It wasn't just viral. It was seismic. Cable news scrambled to reframe the narrative, but they were too late. The raw footage, streamed live and screen captured across every platform, told the story they couldn't twist. TikTok creators broke it down frame by frame. YouTube thumbnails featured her name in all caps. Leavitt destroys federal judge. The cross had become a symbol, not of defiance, but of integrity. Faith under fire. And fire didn't burn her. It refined her. MSNBC tried to contain the blaze. Their evening panel accused Karoline of manipulating the system with performance theater. CNN's legal analyst sputtered something about procedural irregularities. But off-camera, their interns were circulating the transcript, whispering, "She cooked him alive." Even some progressive outlets admitted it, begrudgingly. She exposed hypocrisy in how faith is treated under supposedly neutral rules, wrote one liberal columnist. And whether you agree with her politics or not, you cannot deny she did her homework. Back in D.C., the ripple effects began instantly. Congressional staffers exchanged panic texts. Schumer's office issued a generic no comment, while Hakeem Jeffries quietly unpinned a tweet mocking her from the day before. Jasmine Crockett deleted 3 posts calling Karoline a theocratic fascist. The backlash had arrived, and it wasn't coming from extremists. It was coming from ordinary Americans who saw something they recognized: courage, conviction, and a system that had finally met its match. Across churches nationwide, Sunday sermons referenced her stand. Some played clips on the projector screens. The image of her sitting in court, hands folded, binder open, cross shining, became iconic. And yet, Karoline didn't take a victory lap. She didn't gloat. Instead, she released one statement. This wasn't about me. It was about every American who's ever been told to hide their beliefs to fit in. We don't need permission to be who we are. We need courage to remind the system who it serves. Simple, direct, devastating. Judge Harmon, meanwhile, retreated into silence. His court's website quietly removed his biography. His public appearances were canceled indefinitely. Rumors swirled of an internal review. Legal watchdogs filed formal complaints. The American Bar Association, once his ally, was suddenly very quiet. And Karoline, she booked a primetime interview, but not with legacy media. She chose an independent live streaming platform, one that didn't filter sound bites, one that let her speak directly to the people. She walked into that studio wearing the exact same gold cross. No apologies, no edits, no spin, because the war on faith had never been declared outright, but everyone knew it had begun. And now, it had a new battlefield, a new face, a new voice. Karoline Leavitt didn't just win a courtroom skirmish. She lit a constitutional fire that wouldn't be put out. Not by gags, not by fines, not by fear, and certainly not by a judge who underestimated a girl with a cross and a binder full of truth.